All right, so this is my top 25 players under 25 ranked for this 2023-2024 season. Kenny Beecham did this on his podcast about 2 weeks ago, so that's what the inspiration is for this video. If you have not checked that out, I would suggest you go over there and watch that on Kenny Beecham's podcast. He also has a YouTube channel and stuff. Most of you guys probably should know that name. If you don't know the name Kenny Beecham, you need to get on top of that. But that's the inspiration for this video. And I'm going to tell you right now that this is based off of mostly what I think their players' potential is, not just what their ranking is right now. I'm basically looking at this like in 5 years, I think this person will be at this level of player. That's what I'm going to be looking at. Is basically where I see these guys in 5 years from now. So keep that in mind that it is not a ranking of how they are playing right now. So to get started here, we got our tiers here. Tier 1 is going to be MVP potential. Tier 2 is the best player on a championship team. Tier 3 is like they're definitively the best player on the championship team, so they're not the best, but they're like solely the second best. That's going to be like a Jamal Murray type of guy where no competition for being first, but no competition for being second or for being third as well. So he's definitely the second best. Second/third best player is going to be the fourth tier. That's going to be like Chris Middleton/Drew Holiday when they were with Milwaukee or something of that nature. Then tier 5 is going to be definitively the third best player on a championship team, which is going to be like Michael Porter Jr. For the Denver Nuggets championship. The tier 6 is going to be either the third or the fourth best player on a championship team. So that's kind of like Anthony or D'Angelo Russell or Austin Reeves for the Lakers right now. You got LeBron and AD are 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 is a toss-up between a D'Lo and an Austin Reeves. So that's kind of my tiers that we got going on here. So tier 1 with MVP potential, I got Victor Wembanyama, Anthony Edwards, and Ja Morant. So this seems pretty self-explanatory. I don't think many people are going to be really arguing any of these guys being having MVP potential. Victor Wembanyama, obviously, he's been one of the best rookies. Well, he's been the best rookie this year, already one of the best defenders in the league, and his offensive potential is just absolutely insane. He's already averaging 21 points and 10 boards, with upwards of two blocks and steals. So he's at like 5 combined steals and blocks per game already. So he's probably going to win multiple Defensive Player of the Years by the next 5 years, by the time roughly 2030 starts. He'll probably already have multiple Defensive Player of the Years and will certainly be an MVP contention by then. Then you got Anthony Edwards, who, is doing really, really good. Obviously, he's one of the better offensive players in today's game, and that's going to just skyrocket for the rest of his career, I would imagine. He's only 22 years old and he's already averaging 26 points per game. I feel like in 5 years, when he hits his prime, he could easily be averaging above 30 points per game, which is already alone is going to end up putting him into MVP conversations. And that's mostly the same thing here with Ja Morant. He's only 24, so he is still he's getting a little closer to that 25 age, but he's still at 24 right now, so he still barely qualifies. He didn't really play a lot this year, but he averaging 25 points per game this season. And last year, I believe he was about 27 points per game, so certainly has the potential to average 30-plus points per game, as well as like 8 assists and 8 or so rebounds, which is, that alone, again, is going to get him in the MVP conversations. So next up here is our tier 2, which is the best player on a championship team. So these guys, I think they'll be the best player on their team, but I don't think they're going to be really in MVP conversations. They might be in the conversation for the MVP, but I don't think they're ever going to actually be able to win one. So that is guys like Tyrese Halliburton, Tyrese Maxey, Alperen Sengun, Paolo Banchero, and LaMelo Ball. So starting here with Tyrese Halliburton, he's 24 years old. He's averaging 20 points and 11 assists right now this season, which is obviously really, really good numbers. So I see real potential for him to average closer to like 25 points and like 12 assists per game, which I think is obviously really, really good numbers. And I think he'll definitely be able to be one of the best players on a championship team because, he's such a great offensive facilitator and his defense is pretty solid as well. Looking at a guy like Tyrese Maxey, he's averaging 25-plus points per game right now. I think he could potentially get to above 30 points per game, but I don't think he's ever going to be like MVP potential because I don't think his defense is going to be quite up there, and he does not do a whole lot else on offense. His assist numbers are fairly low for a point guard, only 6 assists a game. So I don't really think he's going to be in much MVP conversations, but certainly I think he can average 30 plus points per game, which is going to be enough to be the best player on a championship team. A guy like Alperen Sengun, some people might think that Alperen Sengun is a bit high on this list, but looking at his numbers from this year in his third season, I believe, um, his numbers are very very comparable to a young Nikola Jokic. So I don't think he's gonna quite get on the level of Nikola Jokic, obviously, because that's a pretty insane bar to reach. But statistically wise, he could be very very similar to a Nikola Jokic type of guy. And even if he can be like 80% of the player that Nikola Jokic is, he can certainly be leading a team to a championship. Paolo Banchero's next up. I mean, he's been looking really, really good. He goes under the radar a little bit because no one really watches the Orlando Magic that much, but he's like only in his second year right now, and he's already averaging 22 points, 7 boards, and 5 assists. The only issues with him are his efficiency, but he's gotten his numbers up, um, you know, this year as compared to last year, and I think he can continue to get those numbers up. I think he has real potential to average, at the very least, like 25, 7, and 7, which is some really, really good numbers. And he's got the body type and the build to be a really, really good defender as well. I think he could be similar to a Jason Tatum type of player, maybe just a little bit worse of a scorer because of his shooting efficiencies are pretty low compared to Jason Tatum. But I think they could be a very, very similar type of player. So Paolo Banchero, if he can get to 90% of the player Jason Tatum is, that's certainly going to be enough to be a top player on a championship team. And then next up is looking at a guy like LaMelo Ball. I think we all know LaMelo Ball's skill. It's very obvious. It's definitely there, but the only issue with him is his health, which is definitely a concern. But I would say if in 5 years he's been completely injury free for the most part, in 5 years he could certainly be a guy that's averaging close to 30 points per game with like 7, 8 rebounds and 8, 9, 10 assists even. So he could probably get close to 30 and 10, which is going to be really, really good and probably good enough to be, to be the best player on a championship team. His defense has been not great, but he does get a good amount of steals because he is pretty lengthy, being a 6'7" point guard. So I think if he can average, 2+ steals a game, which is definitely possible at his size, he'll be certainly could be one of the best players and be leading his team to a championship. Next up is going to be our tier 3, which is definitively the best second player on a championship team. And these guys I got here is a guy like Darius Garland, Jaren Jackson Jr., Chet Holmgren, Zion Williamson, and Cade Cunningham. So first up with Darius Garland. I mean, right now on the Cleveland Cavaliers, he is definitively their second best player, and they are certainly a championship caliber team. So, he's already the second best player on a championship team. So I don't see why that would change in 5 years. I don't see him getting to be like the best player on a championship team. I don't think he's going to be that good offensively to get up to like 25 plus points per game, which you probably need to be if you want to lead your team to a championship. But he certainly can be, the 22, 23 range with about 7, 8 assists. And he's a pretty good scorer on offense, pretty good shooter as well. So certainly could be, second best player on a championship team. Looking at a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr., if this Memphis Grizzlies team was healthy, like we saw him, I believe like 2 years ago when they were really healthy and made a run in the playoffs, I feel like he was already the second best player on that team, and they felt like, they were a championship caliber team already. So I think he's already, a healthy Grizzlies team is probably a championship caliber team, and he's the second best player on that team. So there's no reason why he couldn't be the second best player on a championship team in 5 years. He's really good on offense, and obviously really, really good on the defensive side of the ball because he already, won Defensive Player of the Year. So, yeah. Next up is going to be a guy like Chet Holmgren, who I think he'll be, one of the best players in the league in the next 5 years. He's similar mold to Victor Wembanyama, obviously, just not as good of a scorer, not as good as a rebounder as well, and not as good of a defender, even though he's still really, really good at most of those things. His rebounds are a little bit low, only averaging 8 rebounds while being 7'1", but he is, still, like 200 pounds, which is pretty light for a 7-foot center. So you'd like him to get those numbers up a little bit, but I think right now he's definitely either the second or third best player on this Oklahoma City Thunder team, who are definitely a championship contender. So I feel like definitely in 5 years he could be the definitively second best player on a championship team. Oh shoot, my bad. I'm not done. What am I doing? Next up is going to be Zion Williamson. Um, he's not averaging as good of numbers as people would have expected him to be at this point in his career, but he's had so many injury issues. But recently, he's been able to, actually play pretty full season this year, averaging 23 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists, which is certainly really good numbers. And I think those numbers alone are good enough to be, second best player or maybe third best player on our championship team. But I think he'll eventually still be able to get up to like 25 points with about 7, 8 rebounds and still 5 assists a game. Saw pretty good numbers, and he's shooting nearly 60% from the field. And if he can continue to do that, shoot 60% from the field while averaging 25 points per game, he could certainly be the second best player on a championship team. And then next is a guy like Cade Cunningham. He hasn't been showing massive improvements since his first year in the league. He did basically lose his entire second season, which isn't great. So this is his third season, but really only his second full season playing. So if you take into account that he basically missed an entire year, his numbers this year are what you would expect to see from a guy like him in his second year in the league. But he is about a year behind, which definitely is a little bit cause of concern. But he's averaging 22 points, 7.5 assists, and 4 rebounds on decent efficiency. So as long as he can continue to improve his efficiency, he could definitely be a guy that averages 25 plus points per game with 8 assists and 5 rebounds, which is certainly good enough to be a second best player on a championship team. Next up is going to be our tier 4, the second/third best player on a championship team. So it's going to be like debatable about either them being the second or third best guy on their own team. Next, this tier is going to be with Brandon Miller, Scotty Barnes, Jalen Williams, and Jalen Green. So for Brandon Miller, as a rookie right now, he's averaging 17 points per game with 4 boards and 2 assists on decent efficiency, 44% from field and 37% on threes. So I see no reason why this guy cannot be potentially a 25 point per game scorer. The only downside, I don't think is going to really provide a whole lot more other than scoring, at least on the offensive side. I don't think his assists are going to be, much higher than 3 for his career. I don't think he's going to get much more than 5 rebounds a game. His defense is solid, but he's not really providing a whole lot outside of scoring and defense, which is certainly, not a horrible thing if you're not the best rebounder or passer. You can still be a really good player. I just don't think he'll be the definitively second best guy on a championship team unless he can be a more all-around type of player. Looking at a guy like Scotty Barnes, he's currently averaging 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists, which I think that alone is, and he's a really good defender right now too. I think him alone right now could easily be the second or third best player on a championship team. So I don't see why in 5 years he couldn't be that exact same player. He is currently 22 years old, so in 5 years he'll be 27, which is when you usually enter your prime. So as long as he can get his 3-point percentage up a little bit, it's only at 34. So if he can get that up to like a 37, 38%, that'll put his points per game up a little bit too, which obviously is going to be really good for him, and I think they'll definitely be able to push him to be the second or third best player on a championship team. Looking at a guy like Jalen Williams, again, right now he's either the second or third best player on this Oklahoma City Thunder team. So in 5 years, he certainly should be able to be, at the same level he is. He's currently averaging about 20 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists on 54% shooting and 43% on threes. As long as he can keep those efficiency numbers up at 54 and 43%, I would expect him to get a little bit higher in points per game and average close to 5 or 6 rebounds and assists. He's a solid defender. If you can average 22, 6, and 6 while having solid defense and shooting, 50, 40% from the field and from 3, he could easily be a second or third best player on a championship team. Looking at a guy like Jalen Green, about a month ago, his numbers would probably not have him on this list, but he's been going off. He's had multiple 40-point games in the last month. He had a kid, I believe. He had his first kid recently, which has basically been the turning point of his season right now, which is a big reason why the Rockets went on a 12-game winning streak, I believe. But he's currently averaging roughly 20 points per game, 5 boards, 4 assists, only on 43 and 34% shooting, so not great splits. there. But I think, he's only 22 years old. I think he'll definitely continue to improve his efficiency. And if he can do that, improve his efficiency to like 45 and 35, which isn't, still great, but I think that's good enough for Jalen Green. He can average 20 plus points per game on decent efficiency, at least above average efficiency with about 5, 6 rebounds. And I'd like him to get up to like 5 or 6 assists rather than only 3.5 right now. But he can definitely just make some minor improvements to his game and easily be a second or third best player on a championship team. Looking at tier 5, it's where they're definitively the third best player. So this is like a Michael Porter Jr. type of role on the Nuggets. So these guys are going to be Evan Mobley, Jalen Duren, Tyler Hero, and a Franz Wagner. So looking at Evan Mobley, I think right now on the Cavs, he is definitively their third best player, and they are currently, a championship caliber team. So I don't see why any reason in 5 years he would not be able to be on the same level he is now. He's only averaging 16 points per game, which is not a lot, but you don't really expect him to be averaging much more than that. He's averaging about 10 rebounds a game as well, which is pretty solid. As long as he can consistently average, a good 16 and 10 with 3 assists and roughly 2 steals and 2 blocks per game, which is definitely in his arsenal. And he's shooting, about 60% from three and 38% from three, or 68% from the field and 38% from three. So that's really, really good numbers, obviously. So if he can continue to do that and maybe get up to like 18 points per game, that'll be a little bit more comfortable than about 16 he is right now, but certainly could be, the same type of player he is right now, just minor improvements and be top 3 player on our championship team. Looking at a guy like Jalen Duren, he's currently averaging 14 and 12 on 63% shooting. This is only his second year in the league, so I think he can certainly get up to potentially average like 20 points and like 14 rebounds. Like he's had multiple like 20-20 games this season already. I think he can easily get to a 20 point per game scorer with about maybe 13 to 14 rebounds. And if he continues to have 60+% field goal shooting, I don't see any reason why he can't have a higher volume of shots, be able to average 20 plus points per game for his career or for his seasons. I mean, and that certainly is going to be enough to be the third best guy on a championship team. Looking at Tyler Hero, who's currently averaging 20 points, 5 boards, 4 assists on 44% from the field and 40% from three. I don't expect his numbers to really go up from that at all, but no one's going to be mad at a guy shooting scoring 20 points per game on 40% from three, while being a solid rebounder and passer as well. So if he can continue to just do that for his entire career, he'll easily be able to be the third best player on a championship team, which he already is right now, because Miami Heat are certainly a championship caliber team. They just made the finals last season, and he definitely was the third best player on that team. Looking at a guy like Franz Wagner, I think he's got a little bit down this year as compared to last year, but still averaging a solid 20 points, 5 boards, and 4 assists on 48% shooting. His three-point efficiency is pretty low at 28%. I believe he was, like mid to high 30% last season. So hopefully he can get back to that. And if he can at least get up to like 35% from three and get up to like 22 points per game, that's definitely going to be enough to be the third best guy on your team. Tier 6 is our last tier here. This is either the third or fourth best guy on a championship team. So a guy like D'Angelo Russell / Austin Reeves here this season. You got guys like Jonathan Kuminga, Scoot Henderson, Jabari Smith, and Walker Kessler. So looking at a guy like Jonathan Kuminga, he's currently averaging about 16, 5, and 2 on 53% shooting and 32% on threes. So as long as he can get his three-point percentage up to like 36 or 38%, that'd be really good. He's doing a really good job on the defensive side of the ball as well. So I think he can get up to be a 20-plus point per game scorer roughly with solid defense, which is going to be good enough to very least be the third/fourth best guy on your team. Looking at a guy like Scoot Henderson, he's definitely had a subpar rookie season, averaging only 13, 5, and 3 on 38% from the field and 30% on threes. I think he can still, get up to 20-plus points per game, like 8 assists. If he can get up to like 45% shooting and at least 35% shooting on threes, he'll definitely take a big step forward. I think he has the tools to be a solid defender as well. I definitely think he could be even higher on this list. But the way it's looking right now, I'm thinking the third/fourth best guy on a championship team is going to be a good spot for him. But I would not be surprised if he still ends up being potential like best player on a championship team. Looking at Jabari Smith, he's currently only 20 years old, averaging about 14 points, 8 rebounds, and 1.4 assists. So he's in his second year in the league, averaging 13 and 8, which is pretty solid on 45% and 36% shooting, which is really, really good numbers. I think he can get up to potentially like 16 points and 10 boards a game. And doing that on good efficiency, I think is going to be good enough to be, the third or fourth best guy on your championship team. A guy like Walker Kessler, he's only averaging about 8 points and 8 boards a game right now, but he is shooting 65% from the field, and he's not really playing a whole lot of minutes either, just about 30 minutes a game. So if you compare his numbers to like a young Rudy Gobert, they're pretty similar for their per 36 numbers. So I think he definitely still has the potential to be kind of on a level like Rudy Gobert, maybe not quite to that extreme, but I think he certainly could be a guy that averages roughly 14 points and 12 rebounds and gets you like 3+ blocks a game, which is definitely going to be good enough, I think, to be a third or fourth best guy on a championship team. Now, next tier here is going to be our honorable mentions. They fall in the exact same tier as the rest of them, so I wanted to include them in here. So we're actually going to have 30 players listed, but it's going to be Josh Giddey, Nick Claxton, Benedict Mathurin, Keegan Murray, and Jaden Ivey. So for Josh Giddey, I mean, he averages like 12.6 boards and about 5 assists a game right now, which is solid numbers. He definitely was doing better last season, but adding a guy like Chet Holmgren and getting guys like Jalen Williams, who's averaging more points right now, Josh Giddey's kind of taken a step back. But I think he does still has potential to average about 15 points, with like 7 rebounds and 7 assists, which is going to be good enough to be, a third or fourth best guy on a championship team. And right now, he's the third or fourth best guy on the Thunder team, who are certainly a championship contender. A guy like Nick Claxton, who's taking a bit of a step back. I think he was doing a little bit better last year. He's averaging 12 and 10 right now, which is still solid. He is 24 years old, which is a little bit concerning. But I still think he can average close to 16 points, maybe in like 12 rebounds once he reaches his prime. And he's shooting 63% from the field, which is certainly really good. A guy like Benedict Mathurin's averaging 15 and 4 right now on 45-38 shooting. So if he continue to do that, I mean, I think he'll probably potentially get up to almost 20 points per game. I don't think it's going to be much outside of a scorer, but I think if he gets up to 20 points per game, which I think is certainly possible, on some solid efficiency, that's definitely good enough to be a third or fourth best guy on a championship team. Keegan Murray's in a similar mold, averages 15 and 5. Shooting 46 and 36 right now. So again, I think he can get up to close to 20 points per game with like 7-8 rebounds, and he shoots solid from the field and pretty good from 3 as well. I think right now he's probably the third or fourth best guy on this Sacramento Kings team, who I think are at least close to being a championship contender. And last is going to be Jaden Ivey, who currently averages 15, 4, and 4. On subpar efficiency, only 43 and 32 splits right there, which is definitely not ideal. But he's only in his second season in the league, so you could see him getting some improvements in there. I think he has potential to average close to 20 points with 5 boards and 5 assists, being get up to like 46% and 36%. That'll be really, really good for him. And averaging 25 and 5 is going to be certainly good enough to be a third or fourth best guy on a championship team. So yeah, we're going to have our simple view right here where you got them all listed out 1 to 25. So, if you want to take a picture of that or something to actually, just look at all of them here. But that is going to be the video. Thank you for watching. Make sure to check back later this week for an NBA Power Rankings video as well as my UFL Power Rankings video. And let me know if there's any other sports topics or sports videos or rankings that you want me to do.